Green Utopias and Malthusian Dystopias. In his book Apocalypse Never, Michael Schellenberger criticizes environmental alarmism, which is the systematic exaggeration and misrepresentation of facts surrounding environmental issues such as climate change. Last couple of lectures, I discussed his take on various environmental issues. He argued that much of the rhetoric from environmentalists surrounding these issues was alarmist. Today we will take a step back and critically analyze his accusation that most environmentalists are working in tandem with oil and gas industry, whether they know it or not. To understand the basis of this accusation, we need to revisit and reevaluate a concept we discussed earlier, green premiums. As you would remember, a green premium is the cost difference between traditional products and their zero or low carbon alternatives. For instance, I claimed earlier that the green premium of a relatively cheap electric car like Chevy Bolt over a relatively cheap gasoline car is about $50,000. Bill Gates discussed at length the green premiums associated with renewables such as solar panels, wind turbines, and biofuels. But there has been an elephant in the room all this time, at least according to Schellenberger. None of these renewables are zero or even low carbon, Schellenberger argues. And the only scalable low carbon energy source is nuclear power. We can see this from Energiewende, an ongoing government effort in Germany aiming to phase out fossil fuels as well as nuclear power and replace them with renewables. Here's the plan. Renewable power production will increase gradually. In the meantime, the share of fossil fuels and nuclear energy will decrease. The goal is to make Germany net zero or almost net zero by 2050, which is the target Bill Gates advocates in his book. Most noticeably, according to this plan, all existing nuclear power plants will have been shut down by the end of 2022, and no new nuclear power plants will be constructed. The bulk of the renewable energy will be generated from wind, again according to the plan. And the share of solar will be limited at less than 15%. But those are the plans. How is Energiewende going in reality? Energiewende officially started in 2013. I include data from 10 years prior so that we can compare. The program is behind schedule in terms of phasing out coal and decreasing gas use. It's also seriously behind in terms of renewable capacity. The plan aimed for 30% renewables by 2020. In reality, Germany had less than 15% capacity by 2020. But what about emissions? They are declining sharply since 2016. Although emissions reduction is also behind schedule, it looks impressive nonetheless. So wonderful, right? Well, no, because look at France. They managed even more dramatic reductions than the last 2 decades, thanks to mostly nuclear power. But you might be thinking that's risky. Those Frenchies are sooner or later going to pay for their arrogance with a disaster like Chernobyl or Fukushima. I like the German way, slow and steady. Well, that's also baloney, because the United States was also able to decrease their per capita emissions at the same rate as Germany. And we didn't have a fancy government program on which we spent $1 trillion, which is the amount Germany spent on Energiewende, by the way. So what's going on? Why is Germany not decarbonizing faster than others, despite the fact that they are heavily invested in it? To understand the reasons, we need to compare the shares of each energy source by country. This is Germany, as you would remember, where the share of renewables is increasing by about 5% per decade. Also noticeable is the fact that their gas use increased as well, indicating a linear relationship between renewables and gas consumption, which I'm going to come back to in a bit. This is France, where the share of renewables is both much smaller and increasing much more slowly. And nuclear accounts for more than 30% of all energy generation. But the key to understanding how those arrogant nuke-loving Frenchies reduced their emissions more than Germans is this part. They steadily decreased their coal power. Coal, after all, generates twice the amount of emissions as natural gas. You can see the effect of coal even more clearly in the case of the United States. We reduced this share from 25% to 10%. If you compare the coal line in the bottom left chart to the emissions reductions in the top left chart, you will notice that they have the same trends. All we did was to phase out coal and make up the difference with gas, and our emissions dropped by more than 30%. So for all that investment and effort, Energiewende doesn't have much to show for. But it is worse than that. Remember how I told you that Germany was planning to phase out all nuclear power by 2022? And they aren't building enough renewable capacity to replace it? That makes Germany almost singularly dependent on natural gas. And that seems to have presented a wonderful opportunity for this murderous dictator. He apparently noticed Germany's utter dependency on Russian gas and calculated that Germany cannot do much to help Ukraine if he invaded. And the truth is, Germany is doing exceptionally little to help Ukraine in comparison to other countries. The reason is clear. Because of Energiewende and its unrealistic ambition to phase out nuclear energy, Germany is at the mercy of Putin. If he cuts the gas off, German economy will come to a screeching halt. This is a demonstration of the fact that environmental alarmism has deadly, real-world consequences. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians will lose their lives, in part because the anti-nuclear propaganda took a stranglehold of the German electorate and policymakers. I hope we can learn from their mistakes so that we don't have to repeat history. Energiewende could also remind some of you of an idea on this side of the Atlantic, the Green New Deal, which is a social, economic, and environmental policy proposal that was first introduced by the Green Party in 2016. In 2019, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and several other Democratic representatives embraced the Green New Deal and passed a resolution which I'm linking in the video description. It's not long or technical. I encourage everyone to read it, especially because there is much confusion and misinformation about its contents. Among the targets Green New Deal set for the next 10 years, there is the goal of meeting 100% of the U.S. power demand through clean, renewable, and zero-emission energy sources. That's a great aspiration, but it doesn't square with the facts. First of all, currently, renewables aren't scalable. Part of the reason Germany has fallen 50% behind its own renewable capacity targets has to do with this. To make renewables work at a large scale, either an impossible amount of storage needs to be made available, or the whole system needs to be replicated in non-renewables as redundancy. Otherwise, shortages and overloads are unavoidable. In part because of this first fact, renewables are in low or zero emission sources. In practice, increases in renewables rely on natural gas as a backup, which explains why Germany had to increase its gas use by 20% during Energiewende. Finally, there is also the fact that the only scalable zero-emission energy source is still nuclear. The obvious question to ask then is, why are renewables presented as green? Why do people like AOC think that we should follow the German model, not the French model? The answer is, at least according to Schellenberger, corruption. The goal is to transfer wealth from American taxpayers to the ultra-wealthy. Like this guy, Elon Musk, who said, if you wanted to power the entire United States with solar panels, it would take a fairly small corner of Nevada or Texas or Utah. You only need about 100 miles by 100 miles of solar panels to power the entire United States. As Schellenberger, I, and even Bill Gates explained to ad nauseum by now, this idea cannot possibly work. It is physically and financially impractical to meet all power demand of the United States just with solar panels. You would think that the impracticality of an idea would give an engineer like Elon Musk some pause. But it doesn't. Because he doesn't care that the idea of the solar-powered America won't work, just like he doesn't care that the Hyperloop, Starship, Tesla bot, or whatever nonsense he's selling to gullible venture capitalists nowadays won't work. To understand why he isn't bothered by the impracticality of the solar-powered America, we need to remember that solar installations require significant energy storage. Otherwise, the electricity they generate cannot be used during peak hours of consumption. Musk's biggest company, Tesla, or rather its contractor, Panasonic, is the third largest battery manufacturer in the world and the largest in the United States. So if you install solar panels, the chances are you will also buy a battery unit from Elon Musk or one of his subsidiaries. And there is currently a 26% federal subsidy on residential battery installations. But that's not all. In many places, there are also significant local rebates on top of the federal subsidy. Here is the bottom line. Taxpayers are paying for up to half of Tesla batteries. In rhetoric, AOC and similar politicians appear opposed to billionaires like Musk who pay no income tax and use their wealth to rise above the law and pollute the planet. In reality, however, Schellenberger argues, and I have to agree, that the two groups work only to enrich each other at the expense of the working and middle class. Well, maybe I shouldn't pick on AOC too much because even President Obama wasn't about such corrupt schemes. Between 2007 and 2015, Obama administration spent $90 billion on green stimulus. More than $20 billion of this went to the members of his finance committee and major fundraisers. So for politicians who are pushing them, it is irrelevant if renewables are low emission or not. In the higher echelons of the Democratic Party, the word renewable is a tool for justifying wealth transfer to the rich, just like national security is a tool for wealth transfer for the Republican leadership. But of course, that's the opinion Schellenberger seems to have, and I agree with. As always, I'm more interested in what you think. Schellenberger, however, thinks that we shouldn't blame only corrupt politicians. Many environmentalists cooperate with oil and gas companies to shut down and prevent the construction of nuclear power plants. Indeed, when we look at the statistics, we see that the only developed economy where gas consumption is low is France, the only one with significant nuclear power capacity. Indeed, the only way oil and gas companies can adapt to climate change is by convincing the public to phase out nuclear power completely because renewables are no competition for gas. According to Schellenberger, many environmentalists cooperate with this agenda. Most of the time, the reason is ignorance about the difficulty of completely transitioning to renewables. Indeed, it is fascinating to read about the Green New Deal, in part because no website or document I could find has a single chart, statistic, or step-by-step plan. There are only objectives, but there is nothing about how those objectives will be reached. It seems to me the proponents of this policy proposal have no understanding of the problem they are hoping to solve. There is also ignorance of the linear relationship between renewables and gas use. Most people think that solar panels and wind turbines equal low emissions, but they don't. As the example of Energiewende shows, even massive investment doesn't yield results any better than just getting rid of coal and turning up to gas. Finally, most environmentalists have no perspective on the risks associated with nuclear power and how they compare to alternatives. But not everyone is as innocent. Many anti-nuclear politicians and NGOs are actually funded by the oil and gas industry, which figured out a long time ago pushing renewables prematurely is the only way of saving their business model. As usual, I would like to hear your take. Next, Schellenberger proposes a critical analysis of the contemporary environmentalism by identifying it with Neo-Malthusianism. Before we get there, however, let's start with just Malthusianism, which was first defended by the British mathematician Thomas Robert Malthus. The idea is simple. Population growth is potentially exponential while the growth of the food supply is linear. Here is the idea, but visualized. Population increases at a rate food production cannot keep up with. When population exceeds food production, the Malthusian catastrophe happens and the population collapses. Schellenberger believes that Malthusianism is silly. For instance, it doesn't take into account technology. Thanks to synthetic fertilizers and mechanization of agriculture, food production consistently outpaced population growth over the last 100 years. What's more, population doesn't grow indefinitely. Indeed, education and a rising standard of living lead to a decrease in fertility rates. That's why, for instance, Western European countries mostly have negative growth rates when we exclude immigration. Although classical Malthusianism might be dead, Neo-Malthusianism is alive and well, according to Schellenberger. In fact, he thinks that it is the dominant ideology behind contemporary environmentalism. It is the advocacy of human population planning and a stop to economic growth to ensure resources and environmental integrities for current and future human populations as well as other species. Perhaps the clearest articulation of Neo-Malthusian environmentalism is Jeff Gibbs' 2020 documentary, Planet of the Humans, which argues that there are just too many humans consuming too much too fast. The only way to save nature is radical population control and ending economic growth. In case you haven't seen it, I'm linking it in the video description. Schellenberger is opposed to Neo-Malthusianism for several reasons. First of all Malthusian and Neo-Malthusian predictions have been wrong so far. This is M. King Hubbard, a famous American geophysicist. Hubbard is famous for the Hubbard curve, a mathematical model he used to predict that the United States oil and gas production would peak in the 1970s and 80s, and world oil and gas production would peak in the 1990s. In this context, peaking means reaching the maximum it will ever be. So if oil production peaks, that means it will be downhill from that point on in history. This is Neo-Malthusianism. There's a limited resource, oil and gas. If we keep using it, we will run out. Since food production depends on oil, when oil production starts declining, we will have a Malthusian catastrophe. Luckily, Hubbard was wrong. The US oil production didn't peak in 1970s. In fact, it revived in 2010 due to the fracking boom and has been up since. The same fact is ever more clear in gas production. And world oil and gas production are also up. The reason Malthusian and Neo-Malthusian predictions of catastrophes turned out to be false is their faulty logic. The false idea that resources have a rigid and foreseeable limit. This massive increase you see in world oil production, for instance, is due to fracking. Hubbard and other Neo-Malthusians didn't expect it. Here I'm not claiming that the ground has an infinite amount of oil. Of course, oil and gas are limited because the earth is limited. But it is not easy to predict how much oil and gas is recoverable. After all, technology moves forward and makes previously unrecoverable resources recoverable. Besides, new technologies increase efficiency. Coal, the most abundant fossil fuel, will become obsolete in the next 20 years because we will switch to cleaner, more efficient energy sources. It will never run out, not because it is infinite, but because we will stop needing it. Neo-Malthusians often disregard this technological potential and make predictions based on past trends. What's worse, Schellenberger argues that Malthusianism was associated with eugenics and overt racism. Indeed, many politicians and colonial governments used Malthusian arguments to starve their native subjects to death by imposing artificial scarcity and withholding aid. And according to Schellenberger, the taint isn't just in the past. Neo-Malthusian environmentalism also has xenophobic undertones. The reason why documentaries like The Planet of the Humans strike Europeans and Americans as so compelling might be in part latent xenophobia. We might worry about what will happen when the average Indian or Chinese has the same standard of living as the average American or European. Indeed, every time I see a world map like this, I have to consciously remind myself of the fact that I'm not a typical human being, nor are my fellow Europeans and North Americans. In fact, 75% of the world population lives in this red circle. The reason I bring up this fact is this. Every time we make a Neo-Malthusian argument and ask for population control, we are running the risk of implying that those who live in this circle are the biggest problem, not us. But maybe that's a stretch. As always, I look forward to hearing what you think about all this. And this brings me to the end of this lecture. Send me a message if you have any questions. Thank you for your patience, and I'll catch you next time.